Alrighty, so tonight we're making New York Times cooking contributor Mark Bittman's miso ginger dressing. As of this recording, the recipe has 5 stars across 1,500 people on New York Times Cooking. I found this dressing refreshing and versatile, and I really like how well it held up in the fridge. This recipe calls for carrots, rice vinegar, sweet miso, sesame oil, fresh ginger, as well as salt and pepper to taste. I'm cutting the carrots up into reasonably small pieces here since I'm going to be using an immersion blender rather than a food processor to mix everything up. Likewise, I'm cutting the ginger into relatively small pieces here to help incorporate it into the dressing. Nothing here is getting softened by cooking, so the initial size is important to help it blend. In the comments on the recipe, a lot of people took issue with the amount of sesame oil that was being used. I personally thought it was fine, but it might vary a bit depending on how often you use sesame oil in your cooking and the brand of sesame oil that you end up buying here. I'm putting everything into a deli container, which also doubles as the storage container for the dressing. This saves the hassle of cleaning up a food processor. To help contain any messes that might happen, I put a towel around this, but quickly see that it wasn't necessary after the first few rounds of the blender. As I start blending, I get the feeling that this is going to be way too thick. I hold out hope that maybe blending it further will cause it to loosen it up a bit more, but I give up on that hope after the first taste test. I added a bit of salt and pepper, and I can already tell that this consistency is not what I wanted. I was half expecting this, as the other comments on the recipe also indicated that their results were too thick. Someone suggested adding an apple to the blend, but I didn't have one on hand. Instead, I chose to add some more liquids to make this thing thinner. I knew that I wanted to add some extra rice vinegar, but to help balance out the rice vinegar, I decided to add in some mirin and honey. These all work together to help make the mixture a lot looser, and you can see now that when I start blending this, we get a nice vortex forming on the top. After a few rounds of tweaking to adjust for salt and for acid, I'm happy with this dressing. I personally like this dressing to be a bit chunky, so I decided to only blend this for a couple of minutes. You can make this much smoother if you prefer a different consistency. I'm serving this on a salad of arugula, mixed greens, crispy onion, and thinly sliced radish. I prefer not to toss a salad with this dressing, as I like having a burst of flavor with every bite. I find that for a dressing like this, as opposed to something more like a creamy dressing or like a ranch dressing, if I toss the salad, the dressing just becomes a bit too thin and all the flavors become just a bit too muted. This dressing is refreshing, with the acid and the sugar working well with the ginger and the miso. The carrot doesn't really come through flavor-wise for me, but it helps give the dressing both color and texture. In fact, most of the color is coming from the carrot as opposed to anything else. I left the link to the New York Times recipe in the description, and I hope that you give this a shot soon, and I'll see you all next time.